have to take this all in for a moment. It's so beautiful. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. Came all the way from San Francisco to be here. And it's funny because the question just came up in the intro, but I want to start with the existential question: why are we here? I assume that most of us in this room, if not all of us in this room, work on design systems, or at the very least are interested in design systems. And for those of us who are interested in design systems in any capacity, I ask, why are we here? Why design systems? Why do we do what we do? And why are we into this stuff? Why is this important to us? Do you love exploring tools? I know it's the morning, wake up. Are you a total nerd for like automation and efficiency? Yeah, you're my people. Do you love patterns, turning chaos into order? Do you like bridging the gap between designers and developers? I've seen that on so many resumes. And surely you didn't think I wasn't going to include this in my presentation, but maybe it's because design systems are so hot right now. And they are. And if that is why you're here, that's totally okay. It's a fun time to be in design systems. It's interesting to step back and really think about all these questions that I've asked. Why are we here? What is our mission? What is our purpose? In today's context of design systems, especially in the context of software, product design, we often talk about design tools, pattern libraries, components, automation, but it's important to take a step back and remember the purpose behind all of this. We usually want our design systems to improve our product design and development process. That's usually how we determine the success of a design system, right? By how we improve our product, how much faster we ship the product, how many lines of code we delete in our product. But who are using these products in the end? Well, obviously it's our users, our customers, people. Success and productivity, we have our internal customers that we face and deal with as well. We have our managers, we have our leaders, our executives, our peers. If you're in a consulting engagement, your clients. And when we're trying to sell design systems to our organizations, we usually focus on success and productivity. But a design system by itself alone is not going to achieve either of these things. It's going to take the people behind that design system to make it succeed. Design systems aren't just about style guides, component libraries, UI kits, documentation, though those are really fun artifacts to create in that process. Design systems empower change in your culture. I'm going to talk a little bit about culture today. Excuse me. So I studied graphic design and computer arts at Memphis College of Art, and as you can see, it's a very beautiful school, wonderful architecture. It won a lot of awards. It was built back in the mid-century days of design. But the school wasn't just art and design. We had our liberal arts courses that we had to take as well. And a topic that I found that I really enjoyed was anthropology, or the science of human beings. This is Professor Deborah Halstead. I apologize for the pixelated photo. It was the best one I could find. But she was an anthropologist as well as an archaeologist, and she had a really interesting background. She went on archaeological digs. Wow, that's a really hard word to say. And when she was younger, a Yoruba woman actually accepted her into their tribe. And so she had all these really interesting stories to tell. This is actually a photo of her in a spiritual supply store that she runs, where they sell herbs, candles, incense, ethnographic art, religious icons, and they cater to Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, Wiccans, Voodooists, and so on. And the name of her store is Ebo, the Ebo Spiritual Supply. Ebo is actually a Yoruban word which means gift or offering to that which is bigger than yourself. And I always kind of like the sound of that, to give to something greater. And I learned a lot from Professor Halstead. Her classes, combined with my school travels to Europe, had a really large impact on me. I was brought up in right-wing conservative Southern America, so you can imagine I had a very different worldview back then. My worldview has definitely changed, and I've changed, and I'm super grateful for that. So the first course I took with her was cultural anthropology, and this was the study of the varied cultures of humans. This included fieldwork, surveys, interviews. It also included observing cultures while you actually participated with those cultures. Of course, you had to be invited in to be allowed to do that, but once you were, then you could basically embed into that culture and really get interactive with them. The second course I took with her was anthropology of art. As it sounds, it was more focused on the art or the creations of these cultures. We discuss history, aesthetics, and so on. And then my final course I took with her was world mythologies. And in this class, I actually learned that myth doesn't actually mean it's a lie. It really means it's a widely told story that many people believe, and it usually explains how things came to be. But because these stories get told over and over and they get reinterpreted, over time they do get a little distorted. A lot of times they do involve the supernatural, whether it's beings or events. So these days, most people do use myth to imply a false belief. But when you think of it more as the stories that are being told rather than the false beliefs people had, then this topic gets a lot more interesting. So why am I talking about this today? Well, I was pondering about what I wanted to talk to you all about, and I definitely have noticed that a lot of my writings and my presentations lately have been a lot more people-focused. I am not an anthropologist, but I love people. I've learned that the reason I chose a design systems career, or have even fallen into a design systems career, is all about helping people. I like giving. I enjoy being a part of a positive change in the organization that I work in. In the summer of last year, I left my job where I was the lead designer in the Salesforce Lightning design system. Hopefully you've heard of it or seen it. We had tons and tons of process in place to make our work efficient. We had these incredible design principles, which I'll touch on in a little bit. They still heavily influence my work today. We created internal tools to help us work more efficiently and more maintainably on the design system. And over time, as this grew and as the organization grew, they began to lean heavily on us for support and guidance. So we had to evolve and expand these tools as well as our process. And you can imagine with the weight of a company the size of Salesforce, how much that actually had to happen. So we experienced a lot of change. We were a living, evolving team, which was reflecting a living, evolving process, which reflected a living, evolving product, which reflected a living, evolving customer base. As we all know, people change, people learn, and people grow. But before I dive a little too deep into the really loose ideas I have around anthropology and design systems, I want to acknowledge that there is actually already a field of design anthropology. I found many, many publications as I was looking into this, presentations, articles. One of the books I read is called Design Anthropology, Theory and Practice. In this book, anthropologists Wendy Gunn, Ton Otto, and Rachel Charlotte Smith assembled this academic book from all their studies. And I learned that some of the methods that are in design anthropology are very, very similar to the methods that you might be familiar with design thinking. A lot of the same research methods and embedded research, interviews, and so on. So if you want to learn more about that field, you can check out this book. I saw dozens more on Amazon that I skimmed through. There were too many to kind of like sit and read through all of them. But it's definitely a very fascinating practice to be sure. But as I mentioned, I'm not an anthropologist. I don't claim to be an anthropologist. So I'm not going to reshare, their ethnographic research and their methods. But I do think it's worth learning and apply to your practice, so I recommend looking into it. Instead, I would like to touch on some, as I mentioned, just loose ideas that I've been thinking about on how we can be better design systems practitioners. So most cultures in a sociology context, they have assets that are part of their culture, their society. And you can usually break these assets down into two categories. You have the non-tangible and the tangible. So if you think about the tangible, like material elements, these are the tools, the writings, the art, the artifacts, and so on. And then you have the non-material or non-tangible elements, which are like your beliefs, your values, your language, and so on. Civilization obviously is a little different. It gets a little bit more into how cultures develop. Some indicators of that might be like written language, architectural monuments, forms of hierarchy, social status, what's perceived as progress. And then heritage is more focused on like the things that are passed down that have symbolic meaning in a culture. So this could be anything from food to even like the industry of that culture. Cultural norms are about behaving by the standards of that culture that you're in. Usually this breaks down into laws and customs, and as you know, laws are considered more important, but they both shape how we behave in whatever culture setting that we're in. And you'll find, especially if you move around, one culture's norms can be vastly different from another culture's. And then rituals. So rituals are the established methods and ceremonies. If you think about it, in our world, this could be like your kickoff meetings, your sprint reviews, your retrospectives. These usually mark like a point in transition. So going back to how design systems empower change in your culture. When you do design systems work in your organization, you impact the culture. You change how people work. You change how they communicate and share that work. When you're a part of a culture or, let's say society, you tend to identify and align more closely to that same environment that you're in when you have the following things. If you feel like you belong in a culture, like you have a sense of membership, you belong to something bigger. Another way is that you have an impact. You have influence on others in your organization. You're more likely to give back to that culture when that happens. And people want to be heard. When you feel like your needs are being addressed or are being integrated into a process, you feel valued. And finally, you feel an emotional connection with others. And as you know, this isn't just about you. It's not just about me. It's shared across your organization. Everyone you work with. So empathy is really important here. While these things are in place, when people feel like they belong, when they have impact, when they're heard, when they have an emotional connection, then those people are going to align themselves by the same standards and amongst each other. So in our design systems work, our materials, our artifacts, our style guides, our documentation, our sketch UI kits, our component libraries, the non-material being our language, our nomenclature, our tenets or principles. So, design principles. This is like one of my favorite topics to talk about. It's really easy to get sidetracked with tools, methods, services, but we have to keep the customer in mind, as I mentioned before. And to do this, an essential tool is our design principles. And while I did mention principles as a non-tangible asset, I think in a way they can also be a material asset as well because they are a tool. Alla Kamatova recently wrote in her book called Design Systems, cool title, that design principles must be relatable and memorable. She suggests that you should always use them, you should always refer to them, you should always include them in your presentations, if you're presenting to your exec team. You should always reference them in your design critiques. You should even display them. And she also suggests that you shouldn't have too many of them because it's all about being able to remember them. So when I was at Salesforce, we had 4 design principles, and as I mentioned, they still guide a lot of the work that I do today. The first was clarity, and by the way, total coincidence that my own conference is called Clarity. I actually bought that domain name like a year before we settled on these principles and formalized them. But I think it's pretty cool that this idea was so ingrained in our culture that it even influenced how I named my event. So that's kind of cool. So anyway, clarity. The idea is you want to eliminate ambiguity, enable people to see, understand, and act with confidence. The second principle is efficiency. Streamline and optimize workflows. Intelligently anticipate the needs of people to work better, smarter, and faster. The third principle is consistency. Create familiarity and strengthen intuition by applying the same solution to the same problem. And finally, the fourth principle is beauty. Demonstrate respect for people's time and attention through thoughtful and elegant craftsmanship. So we had these beautifully illustrated posters all over the place at Salesforce. Our design systems intern created them. They're monuments in San Francisco. And he actually had inspiration for each of these principles tied to those different monuments. So we gave these postcards out at events, we talked about them, but most importantly, we used them as a tool. And these principles were how we drove our design decisions. My friend and mentor, or friend-tor, if you will, Craig Villamore, he's talked a lot about this as well. He was the chief design architect at Salesforce UX. Now he's VP of product on a different part of the company. But he's a really smart guy. I love having my meetings with him. He's great. So he wrote an article when we launched the Salesforce Lightning experience, and the design system was launched the same day that the product was. So in this Forbes article that he wrote, he said that the more decisions that you put off and the longer you delay them, the more expensive they become. So it's really important to get to your design decisions as quickly as possible. You want to use your design principles as an actionable tool. So in our case, we stack ranked them. They had a priority order. In that order that I gave them to you, clarity, efficiency, consistency, beauty, was in a very intentional order. And this was how we could weigh our options. So if a certain solution was going to break consistency but actually provided better efficiency or clarity, then that solution would win. Having your principles stack ranked like that gives you the ability to make your design decisions with confidence. And as exciting as design systems are right now, it's really unfortunate that some of them do fail. In my own experience, I've found that failed design systems are usually due to a lack of unified vision, no shared language, no purpose. So if you focus on these areas and have a shared vision in place, you're going to be set up much better for success. So values can shape a culture's norms. These are what is important to an organization. It could be that you're considering what's good and bad, what you want, what you don't want, but similar to principles, like this drives the decisions that you're making and influences the expectations for the work ethic that you expect in your organization. So when I joined Amazon, I learned about the leadership principles that they have, and they actually have a lot of them. Customer obsession, ownership, invent and simplify, you're right a lot, learn and be curious, hire and develop the best, insist on the highest standards, think big, bias for action, frugality, earn trust, dive deep, you have backbone, and you're willing to disagree and commit, and deliver results. So it's kind of a lot. And I'm not going to read through all the descriptions of these, but you can check them out later on your own time if you're interested. But I do want to zoom in on the one that was in the number one spot, which was customer obsession. So according to Amazon, leaders start with the customer and work backwards. They work vigorously to earn and keep customer trust. Although leaders pay attention to competitors, they obsess over the customers. So recently, I watched a biographical drama called The Founder, and as I watched it, it occurred to me that the story has some parallels to the work that we do. And allow me to explain. And I'm not going to try to talk about it too much, because you should just see the movie. It's a really good movie. Anyway, in this movie, Michael Keaton, fantastic actor. He plays the traveling salesman, Ray. He's trying to sell these 5-spindle milkshake machines and convince people that they can make more milkshakes with these machines and therefore will sell more milkshakes. He keeps saying, increased supply, demand will follow. He struggles a bit. The restaurant owners are either too busy or don't want to spend the money to buy these fancy new machines. They think they're going fine at their pace that they're at now. If this sound familiar to anybody? If you've ever tried to convince people why a design system is worth the effort, and instead it's seen as like busy work that you can do later down the road, don't have time to do it now. I've certainly been there. But there is a restaurant that bought an absurd amount of these machines. So much so that he took notice and he drove all the way across the country to find out who are these people, who is this establishment. And he meets the original founders of McDonald's, Dick and Mac. And they shared their origin story with him and what they created, which was their innovative speedy system. So what they did was they removed any overhead they didn't need. They only offered hamburgers, french fries, and soft drinks, because that's all people were buying. They got rid of car hops, because people could just come up to the window. They got rid of, things that you had to wash, dishes, knives, forks. They went with all disposable. Of course, now today, that might be seen as very wasteful, but back in that time, that was a very innovative thing to do. And they cut things like jukeboxes, cigarette machines, and so on. The tennis court scene in this movie is my favorite scene, and it's worth watching the movie just for this scene. They call it the Crazy Burger Ballet, and basically they shut down their business to do this. They drew a floor plan, and they basically choreographed the people through these movements and just kept moving things around, redrawing until they got the choreography just right. Basically, they were automating the process, and the scene is fantastic. Once they kind of land on that synchronization, then they knew exactly where to put the different machines, where things were going to go. But again, it was the people that made this work. There's an article that came out by Airbnb. Shout out to Kari. What's up, Kari? So Alex wrote The Way We Build, How Rethinking the Airbnb app changed the way we approach design. And he writes about their ambition to rethink how Airbnb works. I'm sure Kari is going to talk a lot more about this later today, so I won't go too far into that. But they've been doing some really impressive work. And in his article, he says, here's the simple truth. You can't innovate on products without first innovating the way you build them. So in this movie, that's pretty much what these guys did. They didn't innovate on the hamburger. They innovated on speeding up the process that got those hamburgers in a consistent quality. They did speed up the process. They created even like their own utensil to provide like the exact amount of ketchup and mustard that they wanted. They even custom built their kitchen. But I emphasize that this was all about the customer experience, because the purpose, which they even say, is a fresh, delicious burger from grill to counter in 30 seconds. This was all about getting the food to the people as quickly as possible. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the New York City Transit Authority Graphic Standards Manual. A lot of people that are in systems are familiar with these manuals. In 2014, Jesse Reed and Hamish Smith created a company that was all about reproducing these type of manuals. They're pretty fun to collect. If I'm a collector, I'm sure there's others in here that may be as well. Does anyone own this? Yeah, a few of you. So, as a fan of mid-century design, I really enjoy looking at these. I find them very inspiring. But in the manual itself, it actually states its purpose, which is to orient people within the subway environment. The passenger was given the information, or will be given the information, only at the point of decision, never before, never after. And the program will eliminate visual clutter and information that is misleading or unnecessarily repetitious. So the typefaces, the colors, the shapes, all had a purpose. And I see a lot of parallels in this with what I was talking about with McDonald's. They removed anything that was unnecessary. It was all about guiding people quickly. It was about those transit customers getting to where they needed to go. It was designed for people. But I want to take it back to your internal customers. As I mentioned, I'm now at Amazon. I've been working on design systems for a new product. Usually I'm used to doing this for products that already exist. This is a product that's not out yet. And unfortunately, that means I can't talk to you about it yet. But I can tell you that I'm seeing how this design systems work being done before the product launches is going to have a huge impact on the potential growth of this product. So speaking of product, if you think about all the products that you love, usually these products also have fantastic customer support. Maybe some really good educational resources. Maybe it's because the product lets you use it how you want to use it. It adapts to your lifestyle, your workflow. It's accessible to you. It's approachable. You might even feel like you're a part of it. If you look at the Apple fan base from like a decade ago, it definitely feels different now. But back then, like these people really felt like they were a part of this in some way. So how do we apply this to our work in design systems? Do the people that you work with feel like they're a part of a community? Because that's what you're doing when you work on design systems. You're building a community. Your organization should feel empowered and able to join in on the fun. People need to see it, they need to learn it, they need to understand it, adapt it, share it, adopt it, consume it, evangelize it, support it, iterate it, evolve it. Everyone in your organization is an owner of the design system, and everyone should feel like they should contribute and be a part of it. At the first Clarity 2 years ago, Claudina Sarai gave a presentation called Deconstructing Web Systems, or a pattern language for web development. And in her presentation, she discussed the concept of open borders, which are about working with people across different disciplines and breaking down silos and barriers. It's better to have everyone able to contribute regardless of what their level of expertise is. And I couldn't agree more. Similarly, there's a really great quote by Diana Melter. She's the design systems lead at GitHub. And it comes from her article called How to Empower Designers to Code. And she said that true collaboration isn't throwing designs over the wall. It's designers, engineers, and the rest of the team sharing the responsibility to build a quality product. If you reduce the barriers, support and empower them, designers that code will become the norm. I really like this approach. It's a people-driven approach. So I've been kind of thinking a little bit about the concept of like currency, but not like currency, but more like the value that you exchange in an organization. Currency enables exchange. It's funny, I've been a little obsessed with this show Black Mirror. I've been talking about it all week. See, my display name on Twitter is actually a Black Mirror reference. Anyway, it's a cynical sci-fi on Netflix, and the one episode that I think is closest to what is happening today is called Nosedive. And basically, it's a society that has a 5-star rating system, and they do it in real time, right after a conversation is done, or maybe even during the conversation, perhaps, as you're talking. Pretty much any interaction. And this rating impacted your socioeconomic status. In 2009, Tara Hunt released her book, The Woofie Factor, and she uses inspiration from Cory Doctorow's similar concept from his story, Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom. And in that story, woofie is a reputation-based currency, and the more useful and creative and admirable you are, the higher amount of woofie that you would have. This kind of gets into like weird like sci-fi, like beyond exactly where I was trying to go with this, but I think it kind of is interesting because I've been thinking about the value that you bring to an organization. It's really important to know more about the organization that you're serving. Hear their input, apply it to practice, and find out how you can fulfill their needs. Rather than advertising all the wonderful things that your design system can do, it's better to build relationships and solve problems together. And when you respond well to their feedback, you gain trust. It's really normal to want to focus on affecting change across an entire organization on a wide-scale level. But to do that, you have to affect each person in that organization. And so if you're trying to do that all at once, that can be pretty daunting. If you choose a designer or a developer to work with, find out how you can make their life better, what are their struggles, and their hopes, like how can you work together to solve whatever that problem is. Once you get that deep working relationship with that person, they can then turn and share that knowledge with someone else and on to the next person. So rather than trying to focus on the big giant success, you have these smaller, more frequent successes. And these are the stories that get shared. And that in itself is much better marketing for your product, your design system, than trying to just boast the benefits. So it's important to help others go further. I was talking to Nathan yesterday about a designer I'm working with. I told you I'd put this in my talk. So I've been mentoring this designer on design systems best practices, particularly for visual design, because he's not a coder. So, spacing, type, color, accessibility, best practices. And one day I noticed that he was spending this time doing redline specifications. And I was like, no, it hit me like right in the heart. I was like, no, this is what we're trying not to do. But he said something to me that really struck me, which was, no, I need to do this. He said that he needed to go through that practice of redlining a design so that he understood what we were trying to not do. He needed to understand what that craft was and why we abstract things the way that we do. And kind of reminded me to have that beginner's mindset. In honing his craft, he now understands like why we're creating spacing design tokens and even like utilities and things like that. So as I mentioned earlier, my mentor Craig, I enjoy my conversations I have with him. He's a big fan of biking. And in one of our mentor sessions, he explained to me what a Peloton was. Does anyone not know what a Peloton is? Okay, everyone knows what a Peloton is. I didn't know what that was before. But he explained to me how, like, in a bike race, these people ride really close together. And even though they're all competitors, they're actually kind of working together in this collaborative system. So the person that's like in the front is taking on most of the resistance, and then everybody behind doesn't have to work as hard. And so they kind of like can ride within this, I don't know if channel's the right word, but like they basically don't have as much resistance, so they can just kind of coast a little bit easier. But the person at the front is getting all this resistance and gets kind of tired really quickly. So they can't just stay there in the lead for the entire time. And so there's actually sort of this unspoken like thing that they do where somebody that's in the front will kind of like move to the back, and then someone else will come to the front and now take on that role. And so it's this system of working together. And then whoever's actually riding right behind the people that are at the front, they actually are in the best spot because they can see things pretty quickly and react to it, but they don't have to work that hard. Maybe, hopefully you can see where I'm going with this, but it's about like, you help yourself by helping others move forward. I've been pushing Craig to write about this in a Medium post, so I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning it now, but I thought it was just a really good metaphor. So you want to have your working and pairing sessions. I think this is critical. Work on the system together, have your working sessions, contribute together, and then people feel like they own it with you, and they should feel that way. And mutual learning is also important. Sometimes new things are going to come up that you have to kind of go off and figure something out. Do that together so that you all learn together. At Salesforce, we did advisory boards. We used to do office hours where maybe I would hold an hour on my calendar, but we found that wasn't as helpful as it could be because I might know something and tell somebody something, but other people on my team aren't aware that conversation happened. So we switched to the advisory board model so that we had a front-end developer, designer, different representatives from different teams and areas of expertise so that we were all collectively learning together. And this was much more effective. I often get asked about whether design systems inhibit creativity. Spoiler alert, they don't. I attended Design Ops Summit last year in New York, and my favorite presentation was by Jim Callback. He stood on stage with an upright bass, and he had a drummer, he had a guitar player, and a saxophone player. And he didn't even start talking, like they just started playing jazz, and they were really good at it. And then after they finished their first song, he came up to the mic and he revealed that they had never rehearsed together before. So you might be wondering, well, how the heck did they play so well together? So it turns out, I didn't know this about jazz, learned something new, but jazz is basically a collection of patterns. Like it's a library of patterns. And so you learn those common patterns, and then once you master that, you're able to use that as the foundation to then go off and do these experimental, solos, or you could just rehearse, or you could not rehearse. You could just do things on the fly, and it'll just work because you know those patterns. I really liked this metaphor. A good design system shouldn't inhibit your creativity. Instead, it should give you a framework to collaborate with speed and more creatively. So huge kudos to Jim for that awesome analogy. Provide the frameworks and processes needed to enable and encourage creativity. Giving, coming back to the whole giving thing, giving and sharing is a good thing. If you don't take the effort to provide guidance and to empower and help your organization, the design systems work that you do is going to risk lack of adoption or lack of understanding, or it could become a bottleneck, or maybe it'll even get abandoned, which unfortunately does happen. Recently, I was watching a TED Talk with Adam Grant, and he's an organizational psychologist, and he goes over 3 types of people in the workplace. You have your takers, which are self-serving in their interactions. It's all about what can you do for me? And then you have your givers, which they approach interactions by asking, what can I do for you? And then you have your matchers, which is actually, he says, are most people. And the matchers are more balanced with give and take, you do something for me, I do something for you. So he found that most people fell into this category. So he found that givers were actually on both sides of the extreme on the spectrum of perceived success. So givers, unfortunately, because they're so busy helping other people get their work done, they're seen as not good performers because they're so busy helping other people, they're not exactly having enough time to get their own individual work done. But on the flip side, they made the organization better. He actually did enough research that he says he has enough evidence to support that giving, sharing knowledge, mentoring, actually led to higher profits, customer satisfaction, employee retention, and lower operating costs or expenses. So the conclusion that he ends up going into is that givers are the most valuable people, and you have to protect them from burnout. And the way you do that is by decreasing the amount of takers, because takers are what cause the burnout. But if you have more of the balance, matchers and givers, then you're going to have a really thriving culture and a really thriving team. And I thought this was really super fascinating. I recommend checking out the video online for more details. It's really cool. So you want to give more than you take. Remember the whole EBO thing, give to that which is higher than yourself. It's all about that organizational impact. I want to shift gears just a tiny bit and talk about change. If you stay long enough in an organization, you're going to see that the norms, the rituals, the values can actually change over time. You might even see the language change. And it could be that these things are evolving, or maybe they just go away entirely. And if you move from one organization to another, as I mentioned, you're going to see different norms. You are now introduced into a new culture. You might see some similarities, but there might be new things that you have to adapt to, or different ways of working. The team I'm working on now at Amazon is so different from the team that I worked on at Salesforce. The design system's source of truth is not code on this team currently. It's in Vision and Sketch. And some of you right now might be kind of cringing a little bit. I think an older version of myself probably would be too. But I'm learning to understand this new culture's way of working. And while I am working on a design system that has code and CSS and tokens and all that, I'm meeting them in the middle by actually integrating their process into that workflow as well. So Sketch and InVision is part of that. And to those that cringed or laughed, I heard some of you. I know what you're thinking. Design systems have to be coded components. Some people even go so far as to go all the way into like CSS in your JavaScript. I've seen tweets where people talk about design tools sucking and not having value. They just draw pictures and rectangles. These aren't design systems. I see these tweets. I see you. Can we just stop with that? And I'm saying this as a designer that codes. Like, I want the source of truth to be code. I get it. But one of the biggest benefits of a design system is to improve designer and developer collaboration. So have some dang empathy and meet people in the middle. And so this is kind of the overall message I'm trying to say here. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the community, the design systems community, us. I really love this community. We share knowledge with each other. We create tools. We open source. We write Medium articles, books. We throw conferences like this one, meetups. We converse in Slack. We tweet. We give talks. So if you think about it, in a way, it's kind of like one giant meta system. We're all at our different companies. We all have our own agendas. We all have our own customers. But we're all one unified community working together, and we're making each other better designers, and we're making each other better developers, better content strategists, better accessibility specialists, whatever your area of interest is. So in the end, we do this for the people that use our products. So in a way, we're actually helping serve each other's customers and products by helping each other, which is kind of deep, but I think that's kind of rad, don't you? So I mentioned the founder. It probably sounded like a success story when I told it, and it is, but it's also a really devastating story as well. People can be really crappy to each other when they disagree on direction, they don't align on goals, they don't work well together. Current events in America have me pretty bummed out lately, but I'm trying to influence change just in my own personal bubble that I'm in, my own circle of influence, so the people I work with, the customers or clients that I serve, this community that we share. That's where I can make change and impact. So, I'm working on being more open, more honest, inclusive, transparent when you can. Open source if you can. Sometimes you can't, depending on what company you work at. That's okay. If you can share what you're doing, do that. We'll all be a much better community for it. And so I just want to leave on remembering what our purpose is. We create design systems to grow our products, but those products serve people. So design systems are for people. So get involved in the community. Contribute to styleguides.io by Anna Debenham and Brad Frost. There are many, many examples, presentations, podcasts, articles, and it's all kept up to date by the community. It's the most extensive resource out there. Join the Design Systems Slack. We have a channel for this conference in there as well, slack.design.systems. I just started a Medium publication, so if you want to contribute, send me your article for review, and I'll take a look. Also, follow Nathan Curtis on Medium. He writes so much on this, and he's up next. So anyway, that publication is publication.design.systems. Stu Robson, who's here, runs Design Systems News. It's a really great resource. News.design.systems. Are you noticing a pattern here? And the Design Systems Coalition is a meetup that I started in San Francisco, coalition.design.systems. There are chapters forming. There's one in New York. There are others forming. There's even talk about one starting here in Helsinki soon, so look forward to that. And I just wanted to really quickly give a shout out. I just started Patreon. I got a Patreon, and Stu's here. He's a patron. Thank you. I don't know if there's others in here too, but Webflow was very gracious to become a full moon patron, and so I promised that I would rep them in everything I do as long as they're a patron. And they're really cool. I like their product. It looks awesome. So check them out. And if you do decide to become a patron, that would be cool too, and you can get things like first access to Clarity tickets. So I started Clarity in 2016. It was the first Design Systems conference, but it's been really cool to see, Patterns Day came out in Brighton last year. That was really cool. I hope they do more. And now here we are today at Design Systems Conference. Like, how cool is this in Helsinki? Come on. Yeah. So I'm really excited to be here. I hope you are too. And I just wanted to thank you so much for having me, and enjoy the rest of your event.
Thank you, Jina.